Oh, nice to see you. We will start off a little bit of practice as usual. Zev, hope that wasn't. It's okay. Take a moment to check in with your posture, settling in to a stable, grounded connection with the earth. Letting your heart open up, top of your spine, grow towards the sky. So there is room to breathe in your center, which is balanced.
I think I'm here now.
Welcome. Yeah, thanks. So we're just doing a little bit of silent practice, so go ahead and mute and follow along.
Going on. For all we know, this is the person who stole it.
So establishing a posture conducive to practice. We'll now start practicing by the best of your ability, only not knowing. So if you find that at any moment you know something, then do your best to stop knowing that. Do your best to only not know. If you don't know how to do that, then good job. Attend to not knowing how to do that. If you know how to do that, that's okay. Just continue to do your best to not know anything at all. And one way to do this is to attend to your breath in your body. Breathe from and with your core. And practice giving yourself to the direct experience of that breath. If you find that you know anything at all, the task is simply to stop doing that. You know that you're in a room, if you know that you have a body, you have eyes, ears, nose, a tongue, you know that you have a mind, then just for now, do your best. See if you can stop doing that. I feel like you can take it even as far as not knowing how not to know. I've offered a strategy you can use. You're welcome to use that strategy. But if it's possible even to not know how to do that. You find that emotional activity arises, fear, terror, anger, frustration, or even joy, happiness, exhilaration. Do your best not to know anything about that. Again, if you don't know how to stop knowing, then good job. And that way, to that extent, you're succeeding at not knowing. So do that. Now, see if it's possible, just for now, just for fun, and practice only knowing. Know as much as you can. Know as continuously as possible. Know what shape your body is, who you are, what you're doing, why you came here. What you're experiencing. You know that it's something you're feeling, seeing, or hearing. What its content is. How your experience changes or doesn't change over time. To the best of your ability, just know. Anytime you find that you don't know something, as soon as possible, attend to something you know. Again, make this knowing as continuous, as complete as possible. To the best of your ability, at every moment, know something. Very good. So, we a little chance to explore this topic of the week, knowing and not knowing in our direct experience. The folks in the room, of course, didn't know why I was doing that because they have been in silence for the last week or so. And I never told them, unless they checked Facebook, perhaps. They had no way of knowing what today's event would be about. And so they had, in that way, a slight edge over you in the first part of that practice and a slight disadvantage compared to you in the second part. So why did I lead that exercise? Why did I come up with that and offer it? Well, obviously, as you yourselves may have seen and encountered and experienced, it isn't actually so easy to only not know. When we sit here and we try to only not know, there's all this pesky knowing that keeps on coming in and challenging us, making it hard to do the practice. Of course, the instructions are just to the best of your ability, don't know, and so at every moment you're doing that flawlessly. But nonetheless, we can often experience distractions and feel dismay or frustration. In any case, we try our best to just not know, and all this annoying knowledge comes in and floods our minds. And this is often what our experience of meditating is. We sit down and we have the sense that I should focus on my breath and not know anything. And then all of these thoughts keep coming and distracting us, and we think, I must not be very good at this. And yet then we switched techniques, switched focuses, and practiced only knowing. And well, I imagine you tell me if this was your experience or not. As you did your best to know, it was certainly my experience that all this pesky not knowing kept on coming in. Find that I think that I'm so addicted to knowing. I'm only knowing all day long, just constantly knowing, and yet I kept on finding myself wondering about this or that and realizing I didn't know. Wondered what your experience of the practice was, and I realized I didn't know that. And so I thought, uh-oh, I have to get back to the focus space. And so I just tried to know that that you were there, that I was picturing you in my head. But even then, I didn't know how. I didn't know why. I didn't know how that was operating. I didn't know how I knew that you were there. And these mysteries just kept on invading my sense of knowing. So, okay, that's nice. What's the point here? Why am I talking about this in the first place? Well, first of all, because we've been following a certain text from the Pali Canon, the Buddhist tradition, and we've come to a certain doctrine within that text, which is relevant to this. And second of all, because I have a sense that this point, this question, is one that is, well, really up for us. It's relevant to what's happening in the world right now. So let's start by reading through the passage. In case anyone's coming in late, we, not to this session, but to the series, we've been talking about a certain text for a while now. It's a text that's examining, at this stage anyway, the various views that people had in ancient India about how you should see things, what the world is, how you should train, and how you should practice, and is in particular focusing on the experience of a king who has come to question and reject all of these ancient views, all of these religions or dogmas that were prevalent in India 2,500 years ago, due to a crisis of conscience. He messed up, did something really awful, and realized that these views wouldn't be satisfying to him anymore, and so went off in search of what was really going on. And we're now at the very last view. We've covered a number of other various superstitions from ancient India, such as materialism, the sense that there's only the material world and nothing else exists. Superstition, the religion of moral inefficacy, the idea that there's no such thing as virtue or morality, that it's just a foolish human idea, and other such quaint, primitive, ancient Indian views, which of course are still running the world today. But in any case, we've now come to the last of these views. And this view, along with the one before it, these last two views are especially interesting because we tend to attribute both of them to Buddhism. We have the sense that these views in particular are actually the views that the Buddha taught. The way that Buddhism is often taught in the world today, particularly in the West today, it often consists of these two views. And what are these? Well, if you want to know what the last view is, you can watch the recording of last week. This view, the view that we'll talk about this week, is the doctrine of a particular teacher by the name of Sanjaya Belatthaputta, who espouses the doctrine of something that's translated either as endless vacillation or as eel wriggling. The Pali term for this can be translated, it sort of has, it could mean either of those two things. It could mean wriggling about as though in the way that an eel does, or it could mean this endless moving from position to position, failing to take any view or of any sort on any topic. And so, for example, so the king is now describing this view. King Ajatasattu has gone out in search of the Buddha and is now talking to the Buddha and is describing to the Buddha his experience of hearing about this view. And he says, another time, Venerable Sir, I approached Sanjaya Belatthaputta, exchanged greetings and courtesies with him, and sat down to one side. I then asked him this question, and it's the question that has motivated Ajatasattu's search. Won't get into it for now. If he could point out any fruit of recluseship that's visible here and now. Again, I won't really get into that for now. You can just watch the prior recordings or enjoy not knowing that fact for now. And he says, when I had finished speaking, Sanjaya Belatthaputta said to me, well, if you were to ask me, is there a world beyond? Is there a world beyond this world? If I thought that there was a world beyond, I would declare to you, there is a world beyond. But I do not say it is this way, nor it is that way, nor it is otherwise. I do not say it is not so, nor do I say it is not so. Similarly, you might ask me, is there no world beyond? Is it the case that there is not a world beyond? If I thought that there was no world beyond, I would declare to you, there is no world beyond, but I do not say it is this way, nor is it is that way, nor it is otherwise. I do not say it is not so, nor do I say it is not so. If you were to ask me, is it that there both is and is not a world beyond? If I thought that there both was and was not a world beyond, I would say so. But I don't say so, nor do I say it is not so. Nor do I say it is other than that, nor do I say it is not so. If you were to ask me, is it that there neither is nor is not a world beyond? That neither of those possibilities apply. If I thought that there neither was nor was not a world beyond, then I would declare to you, there neither is nor is not a world beyond, but I do not say that. Nor do I say it is that way, nor it is otherwise. I don't say it is not so, nor do I say it is not so. And so he's now covered the full tetralemma. Any position that you could possibly take within that framework regarding this question, he has proclaimed complete ignorance of. That I don't know. This is basically it. He's saying, I don't know. And further, this doctrine, I don't know, is what I will proclaim regardless of what you ask. I just don't know. And then there are other questions that are also asked. So, are there beings who have taken rebirth or not? Or both yes and no, or neither yes nor no? Is there or is there not rebirth? Is there fruit and result of good and bad actions? In other words, when you do bad things, does that have bad consequences? If you do good things, does that have good consequences? Is there no fruit and result of good and bad actions? Is it that there both is and is not fruit and result of good and bad actions? Is it that there neither is nor is not fruit and result of good and bad actions? Well, I don't know. If I thought it was so, I would declare to you it is so, but I do not say it is this way, nor it is that way, nor it is otherwise. I do not say it is not so, nor do I say it is not so. And Another question, does the Tathagata exist after death? We won't really, let's not worry about that one. He goes through the same formula with that question as well, and I'm not going to try to explain even what that means. It was a question that some people asked at that time in history. So the king says, thus, Venerable Sir, when I asked Sanjaya Balataputta about a visible fruit of recluseship, he answered me evasively. He answered me with evasion. And King Ajatasattu says this thing that he has said after each of these views, which is, Venerable Sir, just as if one asked about a mango would speak about a breadfruit, or as if one asked about a breadfruit would speak about a mango, in the same way, when I asked this question about a visible fruit of recluseship, this guy, Sanjaya Balataputta, just evaded the question, just didn't answer the question. And so he thought to himself, as he has with all of these other teachers, well, one like myself shouldn't think of troubling a philosopher who's living in my own realm. He's a king, and so it's not appropriate for him to cause problems for the people who are living in his realm, and so he doesn't rejoice in the statement, nor does he reject it. But though he neither rejoices nor rejects it, he still feels dissatisfied, and yet doesn't utter a word of dissatisfaction. And so without accepting this doctrine, without embracing it, he got up from his seat and left. So this is very interesting. This is kind of the doctrinal position of Western Buddhism nowadays. Most of Buddhism in the West has a kind of doctrinal answer to these various questions, which is we say, well, I'm not interested in thinking about them, not interested in talking about them. That doesn't seem particularly interesting to me, and so I'm not going to talk about it. You ask someone, say a meditation teacher, is there a world beyond? Ask them that question, they say, basically out of my pay grade, or I don't know, or I'm not interested. Ask, is there rebirth? They say, don't know. The Buddha said that there was rebirth, but I don't know. And people typically give reasons why the Buddha might have said that there was rebirth other than that there was rebirth. Kind of a way of trying to apologize for the Buddha's uncouth and extremist positions on these issues that we in the modern world view as having been totally resolved. The Buddha took, of course, very firm stances on these points and said there is a world beyond. There is a world beyond this one. There is a life after this life. He said that there is rebirth, that there are beings who have taken rebirth. He was very clear on this and insistent. He taught that there is fruit and result of good and bad action, that the way that you live your life matters, that it isn't just arbitrary, that morality isn't just a mere human construct and you just should act however you feel like acting, that there is such a thing as good and bad, and that matters because it has consequences. And he refused to answer the question, does the Tathagata exist after death? He would not take a position on that question. He said, this was one of the questions that he would refuse to answer. He said, that doesn't matter. That does not further the path. So this doctrine is basically the doctrine of rehearsed and professed non-knowledge, rehearsed and professed ignorance. This is the doctrine of practiced lack of knowing. And at another time, he doesn't say it in this text, but at another time the Buddha said that this, I believe anyway, he said that this is the most idiotic of all of the different forms of wrong view. There are many forms of wrong view. There are many ways of being wrong about what's going on, and of them all, this is the most idiotic of them. And yet, we have to face that this answer is the one that is appropriate to give, to the extent that we actually don't know the answer to these questions. The Buddha was not really one for rote he wasn't one for blind faith. He wasn't one for asking people to take on and embrace views without confirming them. You might say, this is a view that is good for you to take on faith and practice with for a little while, but you need to come to the point where you can actually confirm it for yourself. It's looked at in that tradition as kind of an issue if you can't say whether there's a world beyond or not. And if all you can say regarding whether there's a world beyond or not is that, well, the Buddha says there is a world beyond, this again is looked at as kind of a problem, at least in ancient Buddhism at the time of the Buddha. It's a sort of, well, you're working on it, but you have an issue. You have to work through and move beyond that issue, so that you can come to the point of confirming this for yourself, or equivalently falsifying it for yourself. Attempt to falsify it, and if you fail, then there you are, and if you succeed, then there you are. So we, in the modern world, of course, tend to care a lot about knowing, tend to really believe that knowing is a very important thing to do, and we agree with the Buddha in this way. We agree on the premise, the proposition that one should know things. We should know things with ideally direct knowledge, but we should make use of any form of knowledge that we have. This is sort of our modern view. We really celebrate the accomplishments of knowing. We really venerate knowing. And in this world, I think we actually even take it to a level of faith, of actually blind faith. We really believe not only that knowing is good, that it is of use, that it is a benefit to know, but we really believe that knowing will save us. This is kind of the modern world's soteriology. Anyone know what the word soteriology is? This is a word that I found out existed a while ago. It means something like the understanding of the path of salvation, basically. How do you go about being saved? How do you walk the path of salvation? So in the modern world, we believe that the way that you can be saved, the way that the world can be saved, and the way that my own life can be saved is through knowing stuff. Knowing as much as possible about as many things as possible. And yet, as we saw with the exercise that I opened this session up with, we find that even if we just take that stance, if we just take the stance, I want to know as much as possible. I would like to know as many things that it is possible to know. We discover that if we want to do that, we need to actually not know. If you ask, people often say that, not often, but sometimes a few people say that problem with spiritual traditions is that they advocate for not knowing. They celebrate not knowing, they venerate not knowing, and this is a problem, because knowing is good and not knowing is bad. And yet this is an utterly absurd stance to take, as we can see through even a little bit of investigation, a few minutes of investigation. We find that if you just care about knowing, if you don't care about anything else, all you care about is knowing, how much not knowing should you therefore do? Let's say that all you care about is knowing as much as possible. How much should you not know? How much of the time should you not know? Well, as much as possible. You should not know as much as possible. Be confused about as much as possible so that you can ask questions, not knowing the answer, and investigate and discover the answer. So even if you just want to know, you should practice not knowing. You should spend a lot of time not knowing. Devote yourself to not knowing. Work on not knowing. Get better at not knowing. It's been said by some historians of science, so people look at the history of the scientific tradition in the West. It's been said by some historians of science that the basic innovation, the basic thing that the scientific tradition brought into prominence, into the world at large, was not knowing. It was realizing that we don't know the answer. Realizing that we don't actually know, for example, why fire burns. Because before we didn't know why fire burned. So nowadays, of course, we know why fire burns. Kind of. You look more closely and you can get more confused, but that's always true. We have a sense of why fire burns, and it's predictive, it's reliable, it's testable, and it's been well confirmed by the scientific tradition that fire burns because, it consumes oxygen and such. There's a fuel source. There's particular chemical reactions. We understand why fire works, how fire works. But prior to that, we had to actually not know why fire burned. And prior to that, prior to not knowing why fire burnt, we knew why fire burnt. In other words, prior to not knowing why fire burned, we didn't notice that we didn't know why fire burned. We had answers. You asked scientists in the earlier part of this millennium, alchemists, early chemists, why does fire burn? And they would say, well, because of phlogiston. There's this thing called phlogiston, and the fire is manifesting that. And that sounded like an answer. It sounded like we now knew why fire burnt. We had this principle of phlogiston, and you can use the principle of phlogiston to explain the phenomena of fire, and in fact, many other phenomena in the world. The phenomenon of life itself, in fact, is explained by this principle of phlogiston. And in order to actually look at fire, in order to discover how fire worked, we had to go beyond that story. We had to discard the sense that we knew why fire burned. So this not knowing, this really not knowing, we see is at the core of any investigation. And so basically, the contribution of Buddhism is to apply this not knowing to experience. That we actually look at this experience without knowing what it is. That we discover the various stories that we are telling about experience, in particular about who we are, what we are, and we actually look beyond those assumptions in order to do a direct investigation, in order to actually know, in order to come to a point of confirmed direct knowledge. And it's actually kind of interesting, just as a side note, if you trace the history of science, there was this innovation of, I don't know. And you can trace that back through the early Christian church, which held kind of docta ignoranti or something like, I forget the exact pronunciation, but had a practice of this, nurtured it, cultivated it, kept it alive through the Dark Ages. Trace it back and back, you eventually find it in the Greek philosophical tradition, in the form of a particular strand of philosophy that was practiced by someone named Pyrrho, Pyrrhonian skepticism, which is a sort of oddball philosophy. Among the Greek ways of looking at things, the Greek philosophers, the Greek tradition, the practice of skepticism never really quite fit in with the rest. It was sort of always the odd one out. Any way you tried to line it all up, it was this one that was off to the side. And in fact, if you tried to turn skepticism into a view, you just wound up getting the doctrine of Sanjaya Belattaputta. If you turn, skepticism is saying you have to actually question your views. Question, question, question. Don't hold any view as sacred. Don't hold any position as sacred. If you turn that into a view, you wind up with this doctrine of professed ignorance on every topic. But if you undertake that as an actual practice, if you actually investigate your views, it does something. It leads you down a path. And it's an interesting footnote in history that Pyrrho, it so happens, spent some time in India prior to coming up with that tradition, training with Buddhist-influenced Indian philosophers. So, sort of strange now. In the modern world, we sort of have this view that Buddhism is kind of maybe slightly anti-science, but there's at least a little bit, I'm not going to make the argument really here, but one could easily make the argument. You could make the argument that actually the entire scientific tradition is, in fact, sort of a sect of Buddhism. It's an offshoot of Buddhism that took things and ran in a certain direction and then gained some steam with a certain class of problems. The physical problems, the simplest of all problems. Problems far simpler than how an individual human works, to say nothing of how groups of humans work. It's done a lot of impressive work with things far simpler than that, and is commendable on that basis. So, okay, what's the significance of this? Well, the thing is, to come back to this modern religion, this modern view that knowledge is the most important thing, that knowing is good and not knowing is bad. Well, we have to look at our motivations for this sort of thing. Why is this view so prevalent? Why is it so common? Why is it taken off to such an extent? Well, some of you may have noticed, I certainly noticed, some of you may have noticed as you did that exercise at the beginning, that as you tried to not know, as you practiced letting go of knowing and just not knowing, certainly been my experience as I do this practice, that very often a deep anxiety and fear arises within me. There's this sense, oh no, I don't know. And without knowing, I'm not safe. There's a deep embodied feeling of lack of safety and not knowing. For many reasons. Of course, if you look at things from an evolutionary perspective, we had to know a lot in order to get to the point that we are now. And the people who knew less tended to not survive as much. And so to have an attachment to knowing in a way may be reasonable. Certainly over the course of our own lives, we've been indoctrinated into knowing as a tradition. if we're throughout the formative years of our lives, the most important years of our lives, most of us are in systems in which to not know is extremely dangerous. The teacher is going to ask us a question, and if we don't know the answer to that question, then our future is at stake. Our social approval is at stake because everybody believes that knowing in a certain way is good and not knowing is bad, and being smart is good and being dumb is bad, and is telling us that with their bodies and the way they look at us. So we have this social fear around not knowing, and this actual fear, this fear based on actual consequences of not knowing. We know that if we don't know well enough, then we won't get good enough grades, and we won't get into a good enough school, and we won't then get a good enough job, and then we won't get a good enough amount of money, and we won't be able to care for our family, and then we won't be able to survive. And so we see this wraps around and connects with this basic fear of death, this basic survival instinct, that to not know is perceived as extremely dangerous, and often actually is extremely dangerous. And the issue with that is that if we haven't worked through that, if we haven't worked through our deep aversion to not knowing, our deep fear of not knowing, our deep anxiety about not knowing, about not having the answer, not understanding what's going on, if we haven't worked through that, then we, I'm just trying to stay in your practice. Well, it's hard to trust what we know. If we haven't actually worked through that, then it's challenging to trust the motivation that we have for knowing. Because we may say, well, I'm learning all of this, acquiring all this knowledge so that I can save the world, which we often say. I want to get better at these various skills so that I can save the world. Moreover, I want to know how I'm going to save the world and have a plan for how I'm going to save the world. We live our lives according to that. I'm going to do this, and then that's going to happen, and based on that, I'm going to accomplish this thing. We lay out our plan in front of us, our idea of how things should be, and then we work and use effort to make our lives conform to that plan. And if our lives stop conforming to that plan, we think things are going wrong. And if they do conform to that plan, we think things are going right. Well, it's really difficult to trust all of this if what's actually going on here is that we are avoiding the experience of not knowing because we are so averse to it. Because if that is part of it, if that is in play, if that is part of why we are going about all of this, then it's really hard to tell whether we're holding on to the story that we're holding on to because it's actually a benefit or because it makes us feel better. Hard to tell whether this idea I have about my life is something I'm holding on to for the sake of compassion or merely so that I can avoid not knowing. I can avoid that fear, that humiliation, that helplessness, that sense of anxiety, fear, urgency, having to have an answer and not being able to find it. Most of us, most of the time, are putting most of our energy into avoiding that experience. And because of that, we build a society that increasingly, because our society is built on the satisfaction of desire, yes, that's, after all, what GDP is. I mean, often governments try very hard to increase GDP, and if GDP is high, then that's a sign that things are going well, and if it's low, that's a sign that things are not going well. What is GDP? This gross domestic product. It's just the measurement of all of the goods and services purchased. In other words, it's a measurement of the total satisfaction of desire. It's a measurement of all of the desire that has been satisfied by the world, and we set up the entire world that way to optimize for feeding desire more and more. Based on having set things up that way, we go in the direction of increasing knowing, increasing planning, increasing ability to understand who we are, where we are, what we're doing, what's going to happen based on that. And we go further and further down this road of control, this road of knowledge, this road of planning, this road of giving the human mind and human grasping, clinging, more and more impact on the world, more and more control of the world. And that is, frankly, one of the things that's been most worrying to me about the way that we have responded to the pandemic. We've, of course, it's social distancing is important, quarantining is important, all of these measures are important in ways, and they have pros and cons like anything else. But it's really worrying to me that as a side effect of locking everything down, everything has become virtual, which means that the more and more of the interactions that we have are ones that we planned to have. More and more, it's the case that if we're ever spending time with someone, it's because we intended to spend time with them. We're celebrating this victory of remote work now. Everyone's able to stay home and they never have to go into the office, where they don't have to meet people who they didn't plan on meeting. They don't have to spend time around people who they desire not to spend time around, or they don't desire to spend time around. And that is all feeding this engine of desire, of control, more and more. And I have to say, there isn't really a lot of evidence that that's actually beneficial. There isn't really a lot of evidence that to give this untrustworthy knowledge based on aversion to a lack of knowledge, control. There's not a lot of evidence that that's good. There's not a lot of evidence that that's of benefit. A lot of evidence that that causes huge problems, actually. There are now major food shortages that are likely to happen in the third world. There's enormous amounts of fear, loneliness, anxiety. Many people's lives and livelihoods have been destroyed. And that's just through the most recent shift. That's just the most recent instantiation of this. We've been walking down this path for centuries. And the pathway through the centuries of giving this path more and more power, even through the millennia, longer of giving this path more and more power, that path is littered with bones, with skeletons, with the carcasses of those who have been sacrificed because they didn't fit into the plan, because they didn't match what we knew. The literal bodies of those who we just couldn't find a way of thinking about are littered about that path. And so, while of course, we want to, and in fact have to know, we have to come to the point of treating the real questions that we have seriously. We have to come to the point of questioning and going beyond our own assumptions to the point where we're able to look at the actual questions that we have within us, that we have come into this world with, questions that we've come into the world to answer. Well, it's essential that we answer these questions with our lives. In order to do that, in order to come to true confirmed knowledge, it is critical, it is necessary that we actually practice. Come to the point when we are actually able to have the experience of actually not knowing. So now spend a little bit of time in practice. And so good news, we've come to the end of the views. We've come to the end of the various different ways of seeing things that are sort of the prelude in that text that we've been working with to the Buddha's actual answer to this question that King Ajatasattu has. And so I look forward to being able to explore that as well. If you like, feel free to take a little bit of time to move around. Just get up and stretch, or just move your body around in your seat. And find your way gradually into a posture that is conducive to practice for this next little while. And you can continue with any technique that you like, any technique that you have momentum with. Feel free to just continue that practice and allow my words to just be sense phenomena coming and going. And if you like, you can continue with this technique of not knowing. You practice not knowing the fullest extent you are able. And if you like, one way of doing this practice is to ask a question of your experience that you do not yet know the answer to. One question you can ask, the question, where is this? Ask that question of your experience in a way that you actually don't know the answer. Having an experience, you ask, where is this? Where is this experience? And it may be that you find an answer comes in experience. But as soon as you have that answer, drop it. Because by the time you have that answer, this experience is already gone. And so you can ask the question again, where is this? Where is this experience? You may continue to get answers, to know where it is. One thing you can know is that every answer that you have, that you get, is wrong. It's wrong simply because it isn't about this experience. It isn't bad to have those answers. You need those answers. It's about doing a direct investigation, more and more precisely, more and more now, closer and closer to this moment. Where is this experience? Again, the assignment here is to actually not know. And in order to do that, we ask a question, turning our attention to what we do not know. Investigating, where is this? To investigate this requires diligence, energy, concentration. Again and again, we turn our attention to this question, to what we don't know. Investigating this moment, this experience. Where is it? Where is it? Where? 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 Searching for it. It also requires creativity, playfulness, fun. How to ask this question, how to do this investigation. But ask it more and more completely. And the idea about it, you just ask that idea, where is this? And say, it's in a room. Where is that idea? That's your experience of this moment. Where is that? If you have an answer in terms of what you see, what you hear, what you feel, where is that? Continuing to ask this question, where is this experience? More and more completely. If you find that distraction arises, just ask that distraction, where is it? Where is this? So this question becomes utterly tangible. You see that this question is no different from any other question. You wonder about this, about that. That's just all we're doing here. We're asking, where is this? Wondering about that, investigating that, intentionally exploring that, moment by moment. In order to do this investigation more and more completely, it can be very helpful to make use of our body and our breathing. Practice asking this question with our body, asking this question with our breath. In this way, a different kind of answer can start to come to life. An answer that isn't about conceptual understanding. An answer that isn't about knowing in terms of seeing or hearing, in terms of thinking, in terms of seeing, in terms of feeling even. But with this breath, with this body, we may discover that there actually is an answer here. It isn't one that can fit into a human mind. And yet we can ask and answer this question. Where is this? Where is this? Where is this? Ask and keep asking. And so this is being asked by each experience that arises. Everything that comes up, everything that we see, hear, feel, think, know, is just this question being asked. And as this becomes more and more complete, more and more total, they realize that to answer this question is to give our lives. So face that. If that's coming up, keeping this experience, keeping this investigation low in the body, doing it directly with this breath in this body. Ask and face that fundamental aversion, fundamental fear of losing my life. Whatever experience you're having now, just keep on asking, investigating, moving through this. If it's too much, too intense, need to come off of it for a while, think about things, know things, that's okay. Allow that. Whenever you're ready, return your attention to this question. Gradually, gradually working through this deep attachment to knowing, this deep aversion to not knowing. Piece by piece, bit by bit, moment by moment. Noticing if there isn't any sense of exhilaration in that. As you go deeper and deeper into this, ask it more and more totally. There isn't a sense of fun, of aliveness, of risking your life. Allow that exhilaration to spread, fill your body, to whatever extent it can at this time. Very good. So now I have a little bit of time for discussion. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Anyone's welcome to share anything about their experience, any questions or comments or reports or anything else. And if no one has anything, then it's also okay to just enjoy sitting together in silence.
I directly sent you at one point quite recently the very thing you were talking about having a plan in front of me about how I'm going to save the world. And I feel like part of that inspired much of this talk.
I'd actually forgotten about that at the time that I was preparing this talk. I did read through the plan, and I actually really admired it. I thought it was impressive work, and quite...
Yet, even though it acknowledges, okay, yeah, it's quite probable that I'm going to be doing something completely different, how do I figure out what the something completely different is? I suppose you are reasonably likely to answer with a call back to right action and acting from the place of a technique, and thus figuring out, okay, I'm in whatever technique at this point, and for some reason, this technique is telling me to put on ochre robes and go out into homelessness, or whatever.
So this, of course, is a huge question. You know, it's the question of how do I live my life, right? How do I do the most important thing in the world to do? How do I do the thing that's most important in the world for me specifically to do, right? That's the question you're asking, right?
Yes.
So, huge question. So first of all, first step is notice and acknowledge that that is a huge question. It's an enormous question, and it's a real question. It has real consequences. As you yourself know, this question and its answer really matters.
Yes. And that plan tries to answer it, but I feel like it scratches the surface a little bit, which is an accomplishment, to be sure, but...
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So basically, the task here is to get better at answering that question. To be demonstrating an answer to that question. And in this way of training, just the way that we approach it and talk about it and practice it, we really believe in and practice incremental development around here. So you want to be demonstrating the best answer to that question that you have so far. Yes?
Right. Live all the good you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
I believe that was a Peace Pilgrim quote or something.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So that's step 0. So you want to be doing that. And then beyond that, we want to continually work to ask that question more and more skillfully and more completely. So there's actually a skill of asking that question and of answering that question. And part of the skill, as I mentioned tonight or today, I guess it's today, is that we work through directly work through our aversion to not having the answer to that question.
So that we don't end up just grabbing onto something like, oh, everyone says to go into technical AI safety, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
And because we want an answer so much, we end up not actually thinking through, okay, really now?
Exactly. So we often talk in this training, it's a useful framework, and so I'll share it, although at the risk of it being a framework, which may cause further problems and obstruction. So know that sharing this in the hope that you will use it skillfully, because I trust you and trust your life and your commitment to your vow. So we talk about in this training a sense of urgency, that you experience a sense of urgency or desperation regarding answering that question. You cultivate and grow and feed this need, this sense of this question has to have an answer right now, without also feeding any of the, what's called in Buddhism, the 5 hindrances. So a lot of the reason that we generally don't let in this sense of urgency, this desperation, is that we aren't able to separate it skillfully from the 5 hindrances. So the 5 hindrances, of course, just so everyone knows, are covetousness or craving for sense experience, ill will or hatred, slothfulness, torpor, complacency, laziness, anxiety, restlessness, and shallow doubt. So it's very commonly the case that because we haven't worked through the 5 hindrances, when that sense of urgency arises, the sense that this question has to be answered right now, it's entangled with, for example, craving to have an answer for that question right now. To give an example, we have a sense that we have to have an answer to this question, and it's tangled up in wanting an answer, and wanting it so much, in fact, that our reasoning becomes motivated. We become more interested in finding an answer to that question than in answering that question. If you see the distinction I'm making. So, for example, covetousness. So we work through covetousness so that we can experience this sense of urgency, the importance of directly answering this question and having that answer in a way that can actually benefit the world. We separate that from covetousness. We also separate it from hatred and ill will. So it's very often the case that we have a sense, I don't have the answer to this question and I'm so bad. It's so bad that I don't have the answer to this question. I'm such a bad person because I don't have the answer to it. And I should shame myself based on not having the answer to this question. Very often the case that we aren't able to experience this urgency without that ill will and hatred. And so out of compassion for ourselves, we suppress the urgency. We work through that hatred, that ill will, that self-hatred, and perhaps hatred for others if we have a sense everyone else isn't living their vow and they're so bad. And so maybe if I ignore it, then I'm more like them and then I don't hate them so much. And I have to work through that ill will and hatred. Or a sense of laziness. The urgency comes up and we just say, I can't do that. It's impossible. It's too big. Not going to bother. And work through that complacency. Or a sense of anxiety and restlessness, which is a big one for us in the modern world. We really, really believe that the way to answer this question is that we freak ourselves out. We freak out until we have the answer to this question. I have to have the answer to this question. I'm going to go this big, huge, holy struggle of freaking out and panicking and, you know, short of breath and tense and fearful and small-minded, just focusing more and more narrowly. We have to work through that anxiety. We have to let go of that anxiety. So we work through, we purify that restlessness, that anxiety, and as well this doubt. So the urgency arises and we have the sense, either this doesn't really matter, or I couldn't really do this, or it's not, you know, maybe I should just do this thing that I already know I shouldn't do. You know, we find ways of being confused about things that we're not confused about in order to avoid doing what we know we should do. We work through those 5 hindrances, and then that urgency, because it's just naturally there, is able to express and come to the forefront more and more completely. And it's able to guide your life and your actions more and more clearly. You're able to act from this place of clear, direct awareness of what has to be done without turning it into the various problems that we turn it into. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I suppose the practice might help with that, of
Yep.
like trying to be in the present moment without the five hindrances, trying to think about the answer to a question without them.
Yeah, exactly. So today we practice working through this deep aversion, this fear around not having the answer, and this covetousness, this craving around having the answer. So to do that sort of thing, to work through that directly in experiences of great value. And with the five hindrances, again, basically the instruction is just purify them, find a way out. They are holding you in prison and you have to get out somehow. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Very good. Anything else on
It's
that?
a long process, I expect, and a difficult one, and one that's actively being researched and refined by y'all as we speak.
It can be long and difficult. It doesn't have to be. It can be. And it often is. But it doesn't have to be. Typically, it's long. It's kind of, Steve Farr uses this metaphor. And it's a great metaphor. I really like it. It's for a long time in terms of the practice, whether it's the practice of rationality or of mindfulness, it's as though you're pushing a boulder along. Maybe sometimes you're pushing the boulder up a hill, or you're pushing it along flat ground. And then sometimes you come to a cliff. And then you don't have to push the boulder anymore. And it just takes off. So at a certain point, you just keep doing the work. And then at a certain point, you break free enough from the hindrances that this becomes directly tangible. It becomes clear and obvious. And then it can take off. And
Right. You mentioned at one point before, I recall, about how just because it doesn't feel like I'm making much progress doesn't mean I'm actually not. And at some point, and I have no idea when, there's going to be that cliff.
yeah, unfortunately, the basic trick of the hindrances, and they're not sentient, so this isn't really, this isn't their goal per se, but it's their goal in as much as they have evolved to survive, they've developed and figured out how to survive. Their goal is to convince you that it's not working. If you're sitting down and you're practicing, many people here, some people are laughing because they've been through this over the last week. You're sitting here and you're trying to do the breath, and the hindrances their goal is basically just to convince you that you can't do this. So you try to do the breathing and hindrance comes up and you just say, you're right. I can't do this. It'd be stupid to do this. It would be pointless to do this. It wouldn't work anyway. Or something along those lines. Or we just fall asleep, or we amp ourselves up and freak ourselves out. But if you stay with it, many people sitting here right now can confirm that if you just stay with it and don't let them control your life, it does at some point take off. And you discover that there is something being referred to here.
Well, hopefully that happens at some point. I guess there are empirical examples.
Another thing, the Buddha talked at great length about how to do this. There's an enormous wealth of knowledge in the Pali Canon about how to work through the hindrances. One basic point that's made again and again is that we want to set ourselves up for success. So put ourselves in a situation in which the hindrances are not fed as much. So for example, with covetousness, we put ourselves in a situation in which there isn't much of an ability to get sense pleasure in the usual forms that we do. So for example, you may unplug your computer, your electronics, give them to your roommate if you have one or something like that, and say, don't let me touch any of this for the next 3 days, or something like that. This is to make it easier to cut through the hindrances, because they tend to grow into our habitual patterns. The way that we live our lives and go through the day tends to feed them in subtle ways. So to set things up so that you aren't feeding those patterns, at least not as much, can make it more feasible to cut through them. And retreat time is helpful for that, whether it's a retreat on your own, in your own house, or whether you go somewhere physically else and do a retreat there. It can be very helpful for bringing the cliff closer.
Right. Makes sense. And the 5 hindrances are not exhaustive. They're just a class of maladaptive patterns that have evolved to keep you safe at the expense of actual truth. Of like, oh no, what if that's a tiger? Helps because there wasn't that much harm in jumping away from tigers that weren't there.
Yep. Yeah, they've evolved in many ways. They're constructed both by our experience and our cultural programming and by, to some extent, evolutionary history. And as you say, they're not meant to be an exhaustive list. This is a practical list. It's an instruction manual for how to do a practice, not an ontology of problems in the mind or something like that. Good.
All right. I'll actually be signing off now. Thank you for hosting this.
Thank you for that question. Take good care. Anything else? Margaret?
It's nice to see you, Joshin.
Nice to see you too.
I was really excited to discover tonight that in all these weeks of my attending and not attending the sit and being here and not being here, that I still haven't missed the punchline of the story. I had given up on it. I thought, oh, I missed that. And I didn't. I'm flabbergasted.
Yep.
So that's nice. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, a lot's been going on around here.
Yeah. Here, yeah. A lot with so much nothing going on. It's amazing how much is going on. And I was earlier in the day, I was listening to Brene Brown talking about belonging and behavior, etc. And I thought when with your teaching and the meditation, this not knowingness, what a skillful tool that is going to be for me when having conversation with people whom I don't necessarily identify with or agree with. Like so many of us now, I currently really only talk to people I know and talk to people who think the same way I do. But I have a desire to talk to other people. And so when trying to have a conversation with someone who has a strong, let's say, other opinion than my own, I think I could very genuinely say, well, I just don't know, because I don't know what they think. I don't know how they feel. I don't know what they believe. And to be honestly able to just not know would be a good way to go forward in that kind of idea. And also knowing that really I don't know anything either. I had a big long conversation with someone a week or so ago, and after that conversation, she looked all this stuff up on the internet, and she said, everybody just believes everything you say, but you didn't have any idea what you were talking about
Yep.
because you were just wrong. And I mean, I could have ended the whole conversation just by saying, well, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But I did, and it was a party, so I just talked. But I think that's going to be a very good tool for me because I'm not good at talking to people who don't agree with me,
Yeah.
and or with whom I don't relate. And I need a lot of practice in that area. So thank you for uh, teaching me something.
Yeah. Thank you, and well said. Get to the point where we realize that that's a struggle, that's hard. It's very impressive in and of itself. Yeah. So, thank you. And as you say, we don't know. Just a second. We actually don't know, and then also we can get curious about people's perspectives, and also we can be clear about our own perspective. These are all sort of various pieces of how to connect. Mm-hmm. Hannah.
Oh, Hannah, you're muted.
No, you're muted, Hannah. Sorry.
Something that was coming up for me with that question a lot was just kind of, well, where is this? Well, here, now, breathing, and how often those things are in day-to-day life the hardest thing. Just bringing my full attention to the task at hand. Being really incredibly difficult. It feels like when I sit down to write a to-do list or to rewrite a to-do list, it's like, oh, there's 30 things I just wrote down, and I notice my attention and focus being split and throughout the day, and feeling a lot of being pulled back and forth, and being very exhausted, and also being like, I didn't accomplish the things that were most important
Yeah.
to accomplish today. And so I know a meditation I've kind of been trying to bring in is like, instead of writing the huge to-do list, is like, I call it like the 4 arrows, which is like, what are the 4 most important things for today? And like, all right, like practicing, how can I practice hitting those targets, and like, creating that space where like, okay, like I'm bringing all of my attention and focus to just like this one thing. And then, okay, now we're going to do one more thing. And just in modern life and with everything, well, the fact that I want to be all things to all people at all times, which is not very feasible, is very difficult. And I was reading a book by David Levy called Mindful Tech, and he talks about how there's 2 different kinds of attention. There's focused attention and open attention, which is, also kind of goes back to our primal instincts. And yet, like, we're constantly kind of ding, 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 like interrupted. And so it's very easy for me to go through a whole day of being interrupted or back and forth between tasks or people or relationships without having ever been fully present with any one of those things, or like completed, the most important things that needed to happen in order for me to, like you were saying, like, it's like, why are we here, kind of, it's like, what are the 4 things that are moving me closer to why I'm here? So yeah, I've just found that really insightful, to also hear you kind of sharing about the different, what do you call it, the 5 hindrances?
Yeah, the hindrances. Yep.
The hindrances that come up, and I see that, and I'm curious, yeah, just how can these practices be used to kind of help cut through those hindrances in the moment,
Mhm. Yeah. So the main thing is that we sit down and just throw ourselves into this experience. So to somehow set things up so that you have some time that you've committed to, that you can commit to, and then stay there for that amount of time, whether it's an hour, a half hour, or 20, or even 10 minutes, whatever it is that you can feasibly commit to. That ideally is a little stretchy, but not impossible. Those are the edge of what you think you can do. You want to be able to do it, but you want it to be a bit of a challenge. And then whatever it is that comes up, you meet that experience as it is. That's the basic approach. Beyond that, there are many different strategies and approaches to cutting through the hindrances. You can focus on the breath and use a relaxed, energetic breath to calm yourself down and let them, they're kind of spinning given energy that you've been giving them, and to just stay with the breath for a while, just breathing long and slow and yet vigorous, energetic. By giving your energy to the breath, you're starving them of energy, and so they can start to calm down a little bit. Beyond that, sometimes it's helpful to actually go somewhere, to take some time and actually focus on just that. To go into a retreat type of context, maybe to spend some time living at a place where others are working on this with you can be very helpful. Because as you say, there's this constant energy, this activity, this I have to be all things to all people, I have to do all of this stuff, and yet keep on finding that somehow mysteriously we aren't really doing anything. It can be really helpful to basically just find a way. You kind of have to steer your life, because it's this crazy thing that keeps happening, to somehow steer your life into a container, a context in which that whole thing can come apart. Does that make sense? And meanwhile, you're basically kind of in, as I look at it anyway, you're kind of in triage mode. So as you say, what are the 4 things that I just have to do today? You kind of like, I'm going to be completely insane and probably worry about a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter and engage in a bunch of patterns that are stupid, that I know are stupid. But just what is absolutely essential to do today? So you basically, on the one hand, are doing your best to manage and guide and navigate yourself, and in the moment, focusing on what's important and just really just doing your best. And then on the other hand, setting it up, working to set your life up so that you can be in a situation in which it's feasible to cut through the deep patterns that are feeding those surface tendencies. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, Yoshin.
Thank you. So I think we are just about at time. Thank you for coming. You see many friends here now. It's very exciting, wonderful that we have others here. Don't know if there isn't time really to do introductions, but these people are remarkable and wonderful, and they've just been through an experience that is very difficult to describe, which they are conveying with their lives. So, and you can do that too. You can come visit us. for a month, 2 months, 3 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, or if you like, for less time than that. Given whatever we have to do regarding social distancing within the parameters of safety and legality, we are very happy to have any of you come by. So take good care.
Thank you.
It makes me so happy to see all of you there. Thank you all.
Thank you. Me too. So happy to see you. Take care, everyone.
Nice to see you too.
Great talk.
I want to come visit
Yeah,
you all.
I'm driving
Yeah.
up now. No.
See you soon. Great.
Soon.
Road trip.
Road trip, right.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Take care.
Take care.